Over the last year, I have posted hundreds of videos about healthy eating and living tips, and I'd like to share with you what I've learned from thousands of viewer interactions. And really often, people start a new diet or a new healthy eating plan by being incentivized by tantalizing results that they are sold. And recently, a lot of people are getting hooked on the latest health trends, specifically the keto diet and the carnivore diet, or in other words, an animal-based diet. And naturally, many people are asking me about this. So today, I'm gonna break down the 7 things that I think folks should know before they start any new eating plan or diet. By thinking through these 7 things, you will be able to decide for yourself if any specific diet is the right diet for you. So we're gonna start at the top of our list with number 1. Any restrictive diet, meaning there are certain foods being cut out, which is true of both the keto diet and the carnivore or an animal-based diet, is likely going to lead to weight loss. But it's important to realize that this weight loss is not necessarily the kind that you'd want to target. The point is, whenever we're cutting out an entire food group or an entire macronutrient, meaning either cutting out all carbs or eliminating carbs to a minimal amount, cutting out fat or cutting out protein, anytime we're cutting something out fully, we are going to decrease our overall calorie intake, and that just makes sense. When it comes to something like the keto diet or the carnivore diet, you're often eating a very high fat diet that often comes with a higher amount of protein. What people need to realize is that our body has mechanisms and hormones to tell us when we're hungry and tell us when we're full. And one of the key things that tells our body that we're full is the amount of satiety we feel from our meal, which often follows eating a lot of fatty foods. That can also follow eating protein-rich foods. If somebody's only eating fat or only eating protein, they're definitely going to get full much sooner than if they were eating a lot of carb foods. There are reasons in biology why this happens, but the point is, you might end up getting full faster and thus losing weight because you're eating fewer calories. It's just math and it makes sense. But here's where it can get kind of risky. The first point is that if you ever stopped eating this way and you changed back to an eating approach that maybe had higher carbohydrate amounts, often you're going to gain the weight back. And that's the body's response mechanism to overcoming the restriction that it had and recalibrating itself back. There's a lot of mechanisms that are happening underneath the surface that are driving this, but it is a very common experience that a lot of people have when they stop eating something like a carnivore animal-based diet or a ketogenic diet. So if you're somebody who's engaging in a new dietary approach like keto or carnivore, specifically with goals of weight loss, just pay attention that that might not be sustained weight loss once you're no longer following those dietary approaches. Here's the second thing to keep in mind before you start any new diet. Whatever diet that you're engaging in, if it is really high in protein-rich foods like animal foods, or it's really high in fats, it's probably going to cost more money. There's a reason why in many parts of the world, plant foods such as grains, rice, or beans, and some basic veggies are often going to be the cheaper foods. Animal foods and fatty foods are very precious in nature, and they're harder to grow. You might need to have a farm to grow animals and livestock, and the animals need to produce milk, and that's only going to happen at certain times. And so these foods are less abundant naturally than the carbohydrate foods that often come from plants. Part of that is what drives up their cost. So if you are going to embark on a diet that is pretty much only fat or mostly animal foods, and it's just very low in carbohydrates, it's very unlikely that that will cost the same amount of money that if you were eating a diet that had more carbohydrate foods. And that's pretty much true anywhere in the world. So just pay attention. It's a factor that not everybody considers before they're going to change their diet, but it is a factor that's going to impact a lot of people. And I always like to remind people of this. You do not have to have a very expensive diet for it to be healthy. So even if you're not interested in doing a restrictive diet like keto or carnivore, but you just want to be healthier, that doesn't inherently mean you have to spend a lot of money to get there. And I do have other information on this channel about how to do healthy eating on a budget, especially if you were interested in something like a balanced eating approach, including the Mediterranean diet. But even if you're interested in doing something like keto or carnivore, there are probably ways that you can bring the cost down. But that is to say, some diets are just going to cost more than others. Here's another factor that you should keep in mind before starting a new diet like keto or carnivore. Often, a really restrictive diet, whether it's keto, carnivore, or something else like vegan, might make social eating a little bit more challenging. And that's because a lot of foods that are usually on the menu are no longer going to be good for you if you're eating a restrictive diet. So if you have to go to celebrations, weddings, anniversaries, birthday parties, graduation events, even company or corporate events, it might be really hard to find something to eat if you're following a really restrictive diet. So that's one factor, is it makes social eating a little bit harder. But it's not only true out in the public sphere. What about in the private sphere? Let's say you wanted to host a little dinner party at your house for your family or your neighbors to come over, or some work friends, and you only ate a very strict diet. That might make it kind of hard for you to cook for other people. But on the flip side, if somebody were cooking for you and they invited you to their home and you had a very strict diet, that could be really challenging for somebody else to find something to cook for you. Inherently, that's going to make things a little bit awkward if you have to have so many restrictions on what you can eat and you have to explain that to someone, and then you're asking someone to go out of their way and cook in a way that maybe they've never done before or they don't know how to do just to support your dietary needs. So often it can be really hard to sustain a social life in your eating when you're on a really, really restrictive diet. So it's just another factor I like to point out to people. Something I like to do in my own life, and I learned from my family, is to use food and dining as a means to celebration. It's part of the way we enjoy holidays. It's part of the way we enjoy lifetime milestones, is to have a really warm meal bringing everyone together. And sure, people have allergies and people have dietary restrictions here and there, which are really not that hard to navigate. But when it comes to a very restrictive diet, like a ketogenic or a carnivore diet, it just makes it that much more challenging. And the next part is kind of me putting on my doctor hat for a second and pointing out some unintended consequences of eating very restrictive diets like ketogenic or carnivore diets. Very likely, because these diets are super low in plant foods, if not eliminating them entirely, they're also really low in fiber. And we know that fiber is essential for our overall health and well-being. It's very important for our digestion. It's important to help our body absorb water. It's important for the health of our colon. And it's important for us feeling full and being satiated after a meal and staying full. Plus, if we're not eating enough healthy fiber, that's going to cause a lot of problems with the regulation of fat in our body and in our bloodstream. Fiber helps pull things into our digestive tract and eliminate them out of our body. If we don't have fiber, we're not able to do that as effectively. If any of you are following the ketogenic or carnivore diets, or maybe you know someone who has, it's really likely they're going to explain things like they only had one bowel movement a week. And when they do, it's extremely difficult to pass. These are things to pay attention to. It's actually very risky to have to experience in the long term. And I'm not kidding. We have patients all the time in the hospital who are hospitalized just from constipation that goes really wrong. And sometimes they're in a situation where they need to get a surgery just because of that. So you really don't want to be somebody who's not having regular bowel movements. That's neither good for us in the short term nor in the long term. So the other thing to keep in mind with a very restrictive diet, and this is our fifth point, is that nutritional deficiencies are often going to come along with a diet that is eliminating entire foods or food groups. There is a reason that nature creates the food the way it does for our bodies, because our bodies have nutrient needs that need a diverse array of foods. That's always been the case throughout all of human history. Even people who have been hunter-gatherers, there are seasons of the year where they're picking berries and they're picking nuts and they're eating things like honey and they're eating other foods and they're cultivating crops. It's not just pure animal. I know a lot of people on the internet like to say that that's the natural human diet for us, but that's both misleading and does not fit our human experience today in 2024. We are not exercising the way we used to when we were hunter-gatherers. We are not living the way we used to. You really can't adopt that mentality onto today and think that it's going to give the same results. So what are some nutrient deficiencies that can come from a restrictive diet like keto or carnivore? Well, a classic is something like low amounts of vitamin C. Vitamin C only comes from plants. You're not going to get it from animal foods. And if you're never eating plants, you're probably going to get low in vitamin C. And the problem is that when we are deficient in vitamin C, it causes a disease in our body called scurvy. And scurvy has a bit of a famous story because it was discovered discovered on sailors who were traveling over oceans on voyages from Europe to the new land in the United States. And they didn't have any produce to eat. They were just eating fish, or they had grains that were on their ships with them, and they didn't have any source of vitamin C in their diet. And all of a sudden, they had all of the symptoms of scurvy. They had bleeding gums and they had issues with their blood. Overall, it turns out they were just low in vitamin C because they weren't able to eat any plant foods. So it's not to say that there's no risk with cutting out whole food groups. You might become deficient in nutrients. So it's just something to pay attention to and make sure you are being as careful as possible. Now, what's the sixth point to keep in mind before embarking on a very restrictive diet like keto or carnivore? Well, this is the sustainability factor. And I did kind of hint at this in the beginning. If you're going to be doing something very restrictive, I ask you, how long can you sustain that? Are you able to do that for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? Some things are better left as short-term experiences. And I'm not saying that that has to be the way you think of a restrictive diet like keto or carnivore, but there's two reasons that I'm making the argument that you might want to be cautious to do something for a very, very long time that's so restrictive. The first is that it's going to be hard to sustain in different facets of your life. What's going to happen when you travel, when you're in an airport? What's going to happen when you're at a bus station? What if you don't have access to a kitchen? It's very hard to sustain yourself with healthful sources of foods if you're so restrictive and you're requiring that you can only eat certain kinds of food. So that's one factor. The other factor to keep in mind is that very restrictive diets like an animal-based diet, carnivore diet, or a ketogenic diet, we don't have that much data for the long-term implications of following these eating approaches. What about what happens after 10 or 20 years of somebody following this approach? We just don't have any really good evidence to indicate what are the outcomes long-term for our health. So that's where I venture towards being more comfortable suggesting that patients or just individuals like yourselves think about a diet that does have research backing it up, because we know way more about it. We know the good things about it, the bad things about it. It's been studied in very regulated and regimented approaches. It's not just anecdotal evidence from people, meaning they just had their experience and they're sharing it with us. There is actual statistics behind it. And there's something very useful about having statistics behind something. It's safer. So we want to be very cognizant of the safety of the types of information we're learning about or the types of diets that we're embarking on, and what's the level of evidence supporting them. This is one of the main reasons that I like to promote the Mediterranean diet and lifestyle. It's not just delicious, it's easy, it's fun, it's been lasting a long time throughout human history. There's just so much evidence and data to support it and back it up for so many kinds of people around the world. And I'll just add this point. For a diet to feel good, it needs to not be too hard. Anything that's really hard isn't going to last. And if it's not going to last, it's not going to give you any benefit. So just remember, you don't want your diet to feel so difficult that you have to change your life or even change your lifestyle just to handle maintaining it. It should be kind of seamless with the rest of your life. It shouldn't be so taxing and stressful. So then what about the implications of the way we eat that go beyond our physical health? Well, this is where I like to point out the mental health and the emotional health implications of eating. In general, when we're very restrictive, we are adding more psychological stress onto our plate, no pun intended, because we have to constantly be thinking about, can I eat this? I can't eat that. I have to really think through every meal when I go to a restaurant, when I'm at an event with family or friends, or it's a holiday, or I'm at a work event. That's so much extra work that we need to do to think through, oh my goodness, can I eat this? Can I not eat this? As opposed to, is there a healthy option here available to me, whatever the foods are? So just consider that we don't need to be so restrictive and cause ourselves so much emotional stress just to be healthy. Now, if you enjoy the process and it's like a puzzle of trying to figure out how to make your diet work in different environments, by all means, it's your right to do so. But a lot of the times for most of us, we have plenty of stress going on in our lives already. We really don't need to add extra onto our plate. And this is the moment where it really fits to add in the point about disordered eating behavior. Sometimes very restrictive dieting is masking a true eating disorder. And this is something we see clinically in patients. They might not be aware of it, but it's someone's way of managing their own stress by being overly restrictive, and it can cause disordered eating behavior and bigger consequences to our health overall. This is not something to necessarily be afraid of. It doesn't mean if you are eating a restrictive diet like keto or carnivore that somehow you now have acquired an eating disorder. That is not what I'm saying at all. But there are some people out there who do struggle with these conditions, and they are real. And engaging in something overly restrictive can almost exacerbate or worsen somebody's ongoing eating disorder. Just don't be afraid to ask your doctor for some insight, some assistance. If you're concerned about this, or maybe you're interested in doing a keto or carnivore diet, but maybe you have a history of an eating disorder, this is definitely a moment where I can't encourage you enough to seek expert help from whichever healthcare professional you normally talk to about your health. So then what about other diets that are less restrictive? If you've gotten to this point in the video and you're thinking, I thought I knew I wanted to do keto or carnivore, and Dr. Anna's just pointed out so many other things that I really haven't considered. What are my other options? Well, you're going to love every other piece of content I have on this channel, because I like to promote really healthy and balanced eating, no matter what the label of it is. Check out those videos up there, and I'll see you in there.